Welcome to The Program, a podcast dedicated to exposing the institutional child abuse that occurred at the hands of WASP, or Worldwide Association of Specialty Programs, an organization that owned a network of dozens of schools that systemically abused at-risk teens and exploited their parents for millions of dollars. This podcast aims to expose those responsible and seek justice for the damage caused to the innocent children who endured unspeakable abuse. This podcast is for the survivors. I dedicate this to you. Hey guys, welcome back to Inside the Program. This is your host, Caroline Lorson. And this week, I've been interviewing survivors for the podcast. Each interview, I could feel the pressure building for me to release my own story. So join me in this episode for my story to hell and back. I was avoiding it, honestly. I truly was. I meant to record it with the last episode, so the resulting episodes could be focused on other survivor stories, but I didn't. I didn't do it. If there's one thing that I have learned about myself over the years, is that I wait until it feels right. With anything, from eating a meal, to dumping a boyfriend, to sharing my story to thousands of people on a podcast. I have to wait until it feels aligned. I have to be in the mood. It's a whole ass process, I'll just be honest. I've thought a lot about how I was going to tell my story. And each time I felt like, that's not it. That's not it. I don't know. It just didn't feel right. Where do I start? What's important to include? What if my family feels like I exposed them by telling the internet world secrets that I've only uttered to my therapist? I'm still not quite sure of the answers to those questions, to be honest, but the only thing that makes sense is to start from the very beginning. So here we go. For as long as I can remember, I idolized my mom. Everything she did was magic. How she smelled, how she smiled, how she made me laugh until I begged her to stop because my cheeks hurt. She made it magic. I was hers and she was mine. It was just me and my mom. I remember driving around in her VW cabriolet, playing the Bangles. I watched as she danced and mouthed the lyrics as if the entire world was watching her on stage. Her long red nails sparkled on the tips of her pointed fingers. She smelled faintly of cigarettes, Diet Coke, and Samsara perfume. It's forever imprinted in my mind. She was so cool, I thought. I wanted to be like her. She was the type of person that people noticed. People gravitated to her. Although I don't know if she ever really fully realized that about herself. She had me relatively young, at 22. So in a lot of ways, we grew up together. And even now, she's still young at heart. One night when I was about 5, I had the most horrible nightmare. We were at a circus together in my dream, and somehow we got separated, and these terrible men killed her. I woke up completely shaken, tears streaming down my face, and a knot in my stomach that felt like the deepest doom that my little brain could fathom. We shared a room together at the time, so when I woke up, I looked over at her, asleep, with her thick dark hair falling over the pillow. I wiggled my little legs out from the heavy comforter and crawled into bed with her. I remember in that moment realizing the deep, deep pain that I'd feel if I ever lost my mom. I didn't really understand life yet, but I knew that I never wanted her to leave me. My mom was so full of life, but she had penetrating trauma of her own. Somewhere in growing up, she became afraid to really be herself. She felt like the underdog, like the whole world could see right through her outer facade to the child she was inside that felt immensely inadequate. Maybe I subconsciously felt like I needed to protect her. I had to be there for her. She would get into these screaming battles with her mother, my Nana. I remember my Nana saying things like, "You need to get your head on straight and quit screwing around." She'd tell her that she needed help and that something was wrong with her, that she needed to see a doctor. I didn't understand, but it made me afraid. I didn't know whose side I should be on. I loved my Nana, but my mom was my everything. As I got older, my mom started telling me more about her past. Sometimes we'd be on a long car ride, and she'd reenact the humiliation, degradation that her mother put her through. Stories from when she was a child, and later as she grew older, it seemed like the relationship became more hostile and damaging. She told me of being kicked in the back at her graduation and drinks thrown on her. It made me angry. It made me sad for her. I felt like I had to do something. I had to be the protector. As I got older, I began having almost mirror experiences with my Nana. I recognized the tone from her stories. I recognized the anger in her eyes. I'd always been a weird kid, to be honest. I never wore shoes, and I was always outside playing pretend, hunkered down underneath the trees in the backyard. I had an entire pretend world that I played in, complete with fairies and talking animals and storylines that made no sense, but it made me feel alive. I'd swim in the pool, pretending I was a mermaid. I made believe the bottom of the pool had portals that I could swim into that would take me to different fantastic worlds. But then as I started getting older, those games didn't seem cool anymore. I started caring about who I hung out with, what clothes I wore. I started thinking boys were cute, and then became acutely aware of my own body. I didn't like it. I didn't like how it was shaped. All the other girls had cute, flat tummies, and mine was just different. I'd come home crying because I didn't feel like I fit in. I so badly wanted to be someone different. In tears, I would sob to my mom about my problems, about how some girl at school started talking to the boy I liked, and she knew I liked him. I'd plead to her. "Fuck those kids, she's stupid," my mom would say, and Jimmy, or whatever his name, doesn't know his ass from a hole in the ground, she'd reassure me. It helped, but it didn't help. I started changing myself. I wanted to dress more adult. I wanted to be popular and accepted. I'd blast Destiny's Child in my room and imagine a day that I'd be an adult. I could make decisions for myself, and then I'd finally have all the things that I wanted. Frequently, my Nana would take me shopping for clothes. We'd go to JCPenney's, or Penny's, as she called it. I hated Penny's. Before we even arrived at the store, I knew it would be terrible. I'd find a cute top and hold it up, bracing for my Nana's look of disapproval. "That looks terrible," she'd say. "You don't want people to think that you're some kind of floozy." Then she'd hold up a large, neutral-colored crew neck blouse that reminded me of something a much more mature woman would wear. I'd politely say, yeah, I don't know. And she'd try to sell me on it. "This is a wonderful basic," she pleaded. "It would go with so much and you'd look so put together and respectable." I just don't like it. I'd say, to which she'd insist that I should try it on. I'd comply, but inevitably would end up in tears in the dressing room. She'd get angry and felt that I was being ungrateful. Time and time again, she'd grab her handbag and turn towards the door without a glance in my direction. I'd follow her, devastated, swimming in the insecurities of my body. I'd shut down. I'd stay quiet as I watched her unleash her anger on the employees at the store, telling them how she waited for assistance and no one acknowledged her. She'd threatened to call the manager and she'd never be back again. It was awkward, it was painful, and as I saw her tirade people, I could see the same look of confusion and hopelessness in their eyes, and I would shoot them a look saying, "I'm sorry." Sometime later, I was about 11 years old. I got horribly sick. I had a high fever for several days and some kind of throat and sinus infection. For days, my entire body broke out in hot sweats and then chills as I felt the illness invading my body. My mom had to go to work, and my Nana came over to watch me. I could tell from the moment she walked in, it was going to be bad. She had this tic. Whenever she got angry, her head would slightly shake. She looked at me with her lips clenched tightly and her head doing the shake that I had already come to know was a warning sign. My mom left and my Nana sat down at the table in silence. With her glasses still on and her purse by her side, she just sat there, head shaking. "What's wrong, Nana?" I asked her. "Nothing," she snapped. "Well, are you just going to sit there?" "Caroline, I'll do what I damn please," she retorted. "Okay," I said, but I knew it wasn't over. I made it back to my mint-colored room. The entire color scheme was mint and lilac. I had designed it myself. She nearly followed me in, and I could feel the tension rising. "What's wrong with you?" she criticized. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Look at you. Something's wrong with you." "What's wrong with me? What did I do?" "This room is a mess. Look at this." She motioned to my futon, which admittedly was covered in clothes. "Look at this jumble. It just shows what you have going on in here," as she pointed to her head. "That's stupid," I declared. She looked at me with pity. "You need help." Her head shook even more. I felt my heart start racing, and a pain shot through my chest and my stomach. "There's something wrong with you," she said again. Immediately, I flashed back to the things that I had heard her say to my mom. "Don't talk to me like that." I asserted myself and stepped closer to her. But in the midst of my sickness, it all felt like a strange dream. It was just too much to take. "You don't know a single thing of what you're talking about. You're never going to amount to anything," she sneered at me. I felt the tears start to stream down my face, and that familiar lump in my throat returned. Why would you say that to me? I was losing it. I remember going from room to room to try and avoid the confrontation. She followed and continued berating me and breaking me down. I was in hysterics, crying, snot running down my face, fever throbbing, and even more. "If you talk to me like that again, I'll slap the shit out of you." And she held her hand up as if to slap me. "Don't you dare touch me," I screamed. She took a step back with a look of contempt. "Boy, look at you. You need a doctor." Seeing that I had completely fallen apart and implying that I was so mentally disturbed that I needed medical treatment, I was furious and confused and sad. How did all of that happen? In my mind, it had come completely out of nowhere. She peeled out of the driveway and didn't speak to me for months. This would not be the last silent treatment. This was not out of the norm. I was frequently told that people wouldn't want to be my friend and that other parents wouldn't want me around, that I would never amount to anything, and that I was the cause of my mom's stress. It was a heavy load to carry. I started getting angry, and maybe part of me started internalizing the things that I was being told, to which my response was, well, fuck you then. I stopped caring. I stopped trying. I couldn't focus at school because most mornings were filled with stress and fighting. I knew that my mom was under a lot of pressure. She was struggling financially, sometimes resulting in the lights being cut off and other bills not being paid. She'd pace the house, she'd stress clean, vacuuming anything that was on the floor. I'd hear her sigh again and again as she was trying to release this anxiety that had consumed her. All of the heaviness trickled down to me, and I resented it. I resented her boyfriends. I resented that other kids went to school and didn't spend their time crying in the bathroom. I felt lost. I felt alone. I felt utter despair inside my tiny body. I clung to the teachers at school who treated me like a human being, sometimes staying after class to talk to them, but my grades suffered. I so desperately was looking for relief or an escape that it was near impossible to sit down and write an essay on the colonization of America. I had so much more going on inside that took up my mind. Teachers wrote home, I just don't understand. She's amazing in class, but she doesn't turn in assignments. My grades suffered. As I got older, I started getting into the music scene. I listened to heavy metal, hair metal, late 70s punk rock, and lamented that I was born in the wrong decade, perhaps personifying even more that I felt like I didn't belong. After school, I begged to be taken to the record shop Spin Records in San Diego so I could peer through the endless aisles of records and people watch the older high school kids that just looked so cool and edgy in their skinny jeans, mohawks, and bullet belts. My family didn't hesitate to tell me that I was associating with lowlifes and I was destined for the gutter. But by now, even this didn't sting like it used to. I didn't need them now. Or so I thought. They disapproved of my friends, and I was rarely allowed to leave the house. Even in phone calls, my mom would be listening in on the other end, on the house phone downstairs, shout out to the 90s. She'd read my diary, where I spoke my deepest truths and sadness. Each abysmal entry grew more and more despondent and angry. Eventually, I stopped keeping a diary because I just couldn't trust that my private thoughts would remain private, and I bottled up my rage instead. My mom took me to a therapist where I revealed the dysfunctional dynamics of our family. I poured out how hurt I was by the name-calling and cutting remarks to my character. She recommended that my mom try backing off a little and let me experiment with my identity. Later, my mom would write to my family rep at the academy at Ivy Ridge that I had manipulated the therapist to say this, which, of course, I did not. I tried to channel my creativity into writing. I wanted so badly to be a journalist. Writing was my only escape. I decided to start an online punk magazine, and at the age of 13, I began locating and contacting my favorite musicians. I even was able to interview Jello Biafra from the Dead Kennedys. If you're familiar with punk, you know how big that was. Oftentimes after the program, I would grieve over these years. I'd grieve over the fact that if I had really gotten this e-zine off the ground, who knows where I'd be now. At the time, blogs had just become a known thing, and so I thought what I was doing was truly revolutionary. And it was. My very best friend, Sarah, started living with us. She was having problems at home, and my mom had said that she could stay with us for a few weeks so her mom could figure out the next steps for their family. This is when things changed. My mom had gone on a business trip to New York, and my Nana stayed at our condo to watch us. To be honest, I don't remember much of what we argued about, but what I do know is that I was no longer the cowering little girl who was going to let her words penetrate my soul. I fought back this time. I told her exactly what I thought. I told her that she just didn't understand me and that I wasn't going to change for anyone. I'm sure my mom got multiple phone calls that week reporting on how horrible and out of control we were, but the truth is, I just wanted to be accepted for who I was. Eventually, Sarah was asked to go home, which only furthered my resentment. I felt like Sarah was the only one who understood me, and with her, I didn't feel so alone. Several weeks later, I graduated from middle school. The day of my graduation, my mom and I got into a fight about what I had chosen to wear to the event. I wore a pastel pink and mint green vintage sundress with white kitten heels and a distressed denim jacket and guitar pick earrings. The fight about my outfit had become so explosive that my mom didn't go to my graduation. I'm so alone, I thought to myself. About a month went by, and my mom was set on moving to Colombia, South America, with her boyfriend. She showed me the bilingual international school she wanted me to go to, but I did not want to go. I had a good group of friends, I was a cheerleader, and I couldn't wait to go to high school with everyone that I knew. The thought of moving to another country with just my mom and her boyfriend seemed like a living hell. Trapped in a country where I didn't speak the language and away from my friends who had been my only support, I dug my heels in and I refused to go. Trying to make a point one day, she picked up the phone and began dialing my friends' parents, even friends that I was not even that close with, but maybe only spoke to in the hallways of school. Without any previous discussion or explaining who she was, she'd ask, "Can Caroline live with you for the next 4 years?" I could hear their pause on the other end of the line. They'd mutter, "I'm not sure what's going on, but we already have a full house, and I just don't know if we could commit to something like that." The words stung, and I felt the humiliation rise up in my body. "See? They don't even want you," my mom said with a hiss. I cried. I got angry. I wanted to be anywhere else in the world. I started begging my mom to just emancipate me, just let me go. I was convinced that I could fend for myself and we would all just be better off. She refused. Our relationship was distant and icy. I had built a mile-high wall around me, but inside I was deeply hurting. I wanted to escape so bad. One day in June of 2004, what started as any other day, I had my friend Jose over, and together we went to another friend's house, Chad, who lived right around the corner. Chad was a musician, and I thought he was so cool. I thought he was so cool. He was a couple years older than me, which only added to his cool factor. Once we got to his house, Chad was sitting at a table and crumbling up little morsels of green aromatic weed. I had never smoked weed before, but I was so curious to try it. After taking my first pull off the pipe, I collapsed on the couch in laughter. Everything that was said was hilarious. I was laughing until I couldn't breathe. My thoughts were funny. People's faces were funny. Anything, absolutely anything, could send me into a hysterical fit of laughter. But then the paranoia kicked in, and I told Jose that we had better get back to my house. And upon getting home, I felt like my mom could see right through me, like she knew that I was high. As we stood in the kitchen, my mom walked into another room, and at the exact same moment, Jose and I looked at each other and in rhythm said, "Act cool." My mom asked if I would vacuum the stairs, and even in vacuuming, I found it hard not to constantly be giggling and laughing. The next day, though, is when everything changed. I'm not sure why. but my mom decided to have some tequila early in the day. When she drank, she became grandiose, and at times saying inappropriate or awkward things. I hated when she would drink. Trying to ease the tension, I invited some friends over, using my mom's intoxication to perhaps press the limits on her rule of no boys in the house. They stayed for only a short time before it became uncomfortable and they had to leave. I was embarrassed and again resentful. That evening would turn into a nightmare. It must have been around 11 p.m., and my mom's drinking continued. She wasn't aware of herself, and I could see in her eyes that she wasn't really there. She had cornered me in a room, ranting at me about how I was a mess and that I was going nowhere in life. I didn't want to be there. This lasted for hours, and I felt total exhaustion and despair. I wrote her a letter stating that I was leaving and I would be back in the morning, but I just didn't feel comfortable at home. She said, "No, you're not going anywhere." Yes, I am. I was certain. "I'm not staying here, Mom. You're drunk, and I'll be back in the morning." I could see her eyes piercing into me. I turned to run down the stairs, and she followed me, grabbing my arm so hard that it left a welt. I ripped my arm from her grasp and made a run for it. With equal speed and fury, she chased me down the stairs and outside. I unlatched our front gate, and in this exact moment, she grabbed 2 fists full of my hair down at the scalp. "Stop!" I screamed. "Stop it!" At this point, I was looking at the ground, hunched over as she tightened her fists, holding clumps of my hair. I dug my nails into her hands, trying to get her to let go, but she pulled even harder. It hurt. My heart raced, and adrenaline coursed through my body. I have to get away, I thought to myself, and this is when everything changed between us. With no other way out, I lobbed my fists into her stomach, yelling, "Let go!" She released me, and I ran as fast as I could to my friend Chad's house. I hid behind a bush as I could hear her footsteps approaching. I silently peered through the darkness, and I saw her silhouette stumbling up the incline. Despite my heart racing, I didn't make a sound. After it appeared she was gone, I knocked on Chad's door. He answered and let me in. I sat in the upstairs room, pulling out clumps of hair that had been ripped out. I completely fell apart. I felt like I had lost everything. We took Chad's mom's car and headed to the beach. We sat in the sand, and I looked into the night, and the sound of the waves made me feel safe. It wasn't long before Chad got a phone call from his mom that the police were looking for me, and we had to head home. I begged to please not take me back. We analyzed the charges, like harboring a runaway and potentially other things that he could have gotten in trouble for, and ultimately decided we had to head back. After I got home, my mom seemed surprisingly alert and not intoxicated. The cops gave me a choice. I could either stay home or I could go to juvie. I explained to them what happened and that I wasn't running away, I just did not want to be home. Essentially, they told me that because no one witnessed it, it didn't happen, and that I needed to stop giving my mom a hard time. Fuck you, I thought in my head. I went to sleep that night with a heaviness inside. I was numb. I was completely emotionally spent, and somehow I faded off to bed. The next day, I was getting my things ready for summer camp. I had a large blue and black duffel bag that was stuffed to the brim with camp clothes, towels, a canteen, a laundry sack, and toiletries. I stood in the corner of my room, putting glamour shots of my friends into a yellow address book. I wrote down their addresses so I could write them letters while I was away. At that time, I noticed a black truck outside and thought, That's odd, but didn't pay much attention and continued packing. Moments later, my locked bedroom door flew open with a bang. Quickly, I turned around to see a tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed man standing in my doorway. By his side was a shorter, Polynesian-looking woman with dark, glossy hair and sharp eyes. "Don't make any sudden movements," he commanded. I stood there. "You're under our custody now," he shouted. "Don't try to run, or you're only going to make this harder on yourself." He moved closer now. I was shocked. I had no idea what was happening. "You can do this the hard way, or you can do this the easy way," he said, holding a pair of handcuffs. "And I promise you don't want the hard way," he added. I clearly wasn't trying to run, and I had no intention to fight back. He told me, "If you have anything on you, drop it on the ground and just kick it under the bed." What do you mean? I was so confused. "Drugs. Do you have any drugs on you?" No, I responded in a quiet voice. They escorted me outside to their black truck. My mom followed behind, crying. "We're taking you to boarding school," he explained. I was partly relieved. Maybe this was my fresh start. I hugged my mom goodbye, and off we went. They took me on a plane from San Diego, California to Minneapolis, then to New York City. They dropped me off with another pair of transporters who would drive me 6.5 hours to a tiny rural town in far upstate New York named Ogdensburg. Like most people, I had never heard of Ogdensburg before, but I had high hopes that this would be the place where I could finally be free. I could not have been more wrong. We pulled into a dimly lit driveway of a flat-looking brick building. The single-story structure looked characterless and obscure. This was the Academy at Ivy Ridge. It was far less glamorous than I had imagined. As we walked up to the front door with my bags, I looked through the glass front doors to a long, off-white hallway with fluorescent lights. A woman appeared. She was short and squat and had the face of a mean bulldog. There was not an ounce of compassion or interest in her eyes. She waved her badge over the magnetic sensor, which released the doors, and I stepped inside. "My name is Miss S," she said. Little did I know that this would be the last time that I would be outside this building for 16 months. Without a word, she gruffly linked her arm under mine and held onto me tightly. My feet moved quickly underneath me to keep up. She ushered me down a hallway and out a back door, again using her badge to unlock the heavy magnetized door. Outside, a car was waiting, and once I was securely seated in the back, she released my arm. We drove through the parking lot and down a side lane that led us deeper into the campus of the facility. Arriving at a back door, she once again grabbed my arm and brought me to an upstairs bathroom. The hallways looked barren, just long, straight tunnels of cinder block. A staff member sitting in fold-out chairs on either side of the hallway, each of them looking equally as disinterested. Miss S brought me into a bathroom and ordered me to get naked. "Like all the way?" I asked. "All the way," she said, like she had done it 1,000,000 times. "Do some jumping jacks." She watched me. "Now squat down and cough." I had never felt more exposed. But I did what she asked. They tossed me my pajamas and pulled a thin, dingy mattress into the brightly lit hallway. "This is where you'll sleep." She looked at me with a satisfactory grin. Her eyes looked wild and beady. I put my matching sheet set from home on the small mattress. The bright, silky sheet set stood out, contrasting against the dirty, institutional setting. "Now keep your hands above the covers so staff can see them," Miss S instructed. I didn't know what for, but I complied. I complied a lot in the program, and looking back, I have a tinge of regret about not fighting back more. Then, the next morning, girls bustled silently out to the hallway. Their eyes swollen from sleep, they stood against the cinder block wall, facing forward, expressionless. Each girl, while still in their pajamas, had a uniform, hairbrush, and toothbrush tucked neatly under their arms. "You may go in," said staff, and the girls poured into the community bathroom. Toilets flushed, water spouted from the sinks, and each girl raced to put on her uniform. But there was no talking, no laughter, no nothing. I was so confused. "What do I do?" I asked. They ignored me. I tried again. Where do I go?" "Who's talking in there?" staff shouted. I moved to the door of the bathroom. "That was me, I'm sorry." I explained, "I just got here." "Oh, you're the intake," she said gruffly. "Yeah, I think so. Just get in line and we'll figure you out over at the library." I stood in line. For the next 3 days, a fellow student, we'll call her Jay, stood behind me in line and militantly explained all the rules. "Stop doing that," she said. "That would be a correction." I didn't know what she meant. "Stop looking out of line. That's a correction." She sounded exasperated. I faced forward. "You're slouching. Stop it. Legs straight. Look forward. Don't look out of line." I stared at the girl's head in front of me, eventually memorizing every split end in the exact way that her ponytail wrapped around the end of her braid. I stared blankly, hoping to not get in trouble. As we stood outside the cafeteria, staff shouted, "Towards the wall, ladies!" Jay explained to me that we weren't allowed to look at boys, so when there was a boy within eyesight, we turned towards the wall and looked down. Even then, it felt degrading. I quickly learned that there was not a moment of any day that was not planned, monitored, and closely observed for even the most minute infraction. We sat endlessly in complete silence, either writing in our notebooks or staring at the screen of our Christian-based online school system. Outside of this, there was no technology. No TV, no music, no singing, no talking, no nothing. I watched the girls as they moved robotically through the campus. They would pause at the doorways and in silence would hold a finger up, wiggling it in a forward motion. Staff would shout, "Go ahead," and the girl would move through the doorway. She'd grab her binder from the shelf and stand behind her seat at the table. Blankly, she'd stand by the chair, again wiggling her finger, in silence, motioning down. "Sit down," a staff would shout, and she'd sit down. Each night, we'd watch a 30-minute VHS tape of some self-help series. The main characters were puppets mixed with human actors, and each story had some moral like, "That's why you should be honest, kids," or "Do the right thing." And they seemed outdated and juvenile. Quickly, I learned to shut off, to go numb, to be a zombie. I tried to be unnoticed, so I wouldn't get in trouble. Even though my heart would pound and I felt trapped, the look on my face stayed completely blank. I did not want to draw any kind of attention. But more than anything, I remembered the smell. It was musty and smelled like bodies. Each room had its own scent. I specifically remember the smell of the old gym before they finished building the new one. During gym, we would walk the box, which was continuously walking in line structure around the gym, over and over and over again, as staff scanned us for anything that was unsatisfactory. It was mindless, and I could feel myself retreating further inside myself. After gym, we would shower and return to our studies. One day, when I was still new, I exited the shower area and had accidentally left my shampoo in the shower, but went back to get it. A staff member saw me go to retrieve my shampoo and quickly issued me a demerit. With no points, that meant I had to go back to study hall. I sat in study hall for days, copying pages and pages and pages of the rule book, as an instrumental version of The Sound of Silence echoed on repeat in the background. Miss A walked in and slammed her hands down on the desk. "Wake up!" she shouted. The whole room jumped. "It's time for fitness," she said gleefully with a mischievous glint in her eye. The study hall girls lined up and we headed to the large seminar room upstairs. For over an hour, we ran through the various exercises, running sprints, mountain climbers, push-ups, jumps. There was a lengthy list. Miss A was known for being especially difficult and at times unpredictable. When she came around, everyone tightened up. She was known for dishing out demerits with ease, ruining girls' entire programs, or simply just throwing an entire family in study hall. We never knew what was going to happen. We were always on edge, in fear, and anxiously trying to avoid demerits. But sometimes girls would get sick of it. They'd snap. They couldn't take it anymore. And they were carried to the intervention room where they would sit in a tiny 7 by 7 foot cinder block room with no windows, in silence, completely isolated. "You're lucky we can't do OP anymore," Miss A touted. I heard things about OP. I heard it was terrible. Girls would lay face down in a stressed position, and if they moved in the slightest, they would be restrained into submission. When girls came back from intervention, they looked different. They looked defeated and hollow. But truthfully, we all looked defeated and hollow. I spent so much time in silence, I truly think I started to lose my mind. I memorized every line and etching in the brick wall. I knew every spot on the carpet, and day in and day out, we would pace through the hallways and I'd make a mental tally. There's the spot, there's the crack on the wall, there's the grease smudge from God knows what. The days began to all run together. I built a world inside my own mind to keep me entertained. I replayed past conversations and imagined the day that I would get out. But my dream world would be snapped into reality by the sound of a girl screaming, "Get off of me! Get off of me!" as male staff sat on top of her, pushing her face into the ground. Another time our family was standing in the hallway of the library, and I could hear a girl yell and then a loud smack, and collectively you could hear the hallway go, Staff radioed, "We need backup staff! We need backup staff!" A girl had thrown herself over the railing of the second floor. Eyes forward, I listened to the commotion. I listened to the movement of bodies and the gargled sound of the girl who had jumped. I feel one of the most traumatizing parts of this experience was watching girls be violently restrained, but having to remain emotionless. There was nothing I could do. I couldn't help. I was powerless. I learned to accept my powerlessness and just tried to be appeasing in any way possible. I just wanted to go home. I wrote to my mom that I didn't want to graduate. I wanted to just be home so bad. Staff had told her I was manipulating and not to listen to me. They insisted that my success relied on her dedication to graduation. She followed suit. It would not waver on graduation. I was 14 years old and knew that if I didn't work the program, I would be there for 4 years, and I didn't know if I could handle that. I drank the Kool-Aid. I worked the program. I went to seminars and learned how to be accountable, but to a shocking extreme. I wrote home to my mom that I realized why I had been molested as a child. I explained that I put myself out there in a sexual way, and I got exactly what I asked for. This makes me so sick to my stomach. I blamed myself for everything, which was fully reaffirmed by staff who would say, "Yeah, this is why your parents don't want you. You've ruined your families." But in hindsight, these staff didn't know shit. They knew nothing. But they brainwashed us through destructive and abusive processes in the required seminars. They made us verbally attack each other, and if you responded at all to the attacks, then you would be humiliated and told to leave the seminar, tacking on weeks to your stay at the program. I learned to comply. I learned to do anything that would make me acceptable. The truth is, I just wanted my mom to want me back home. And if that meant being a program robot, then I was going to be the best program robot I could be. But it couldn't have been more glaring enough that this school lacked significant safety protocol. There was a girl in my group who had pulled her arm out of the socket in gym class. She wrote medical request after medical request asking for treatment. This went on for weeks. She'd cry silently in pain as you could visibly see that her shoulder was slumped down and disfigured. She was told that she was faking it and that she was just wanting attention. This was their favorite line, that we were manipulating. She never got treatment, and they told her to just drink water. When I entered the program, I had braces, which required monthly dentist appointments, but because there was no medical care, eventually the rubber bands around the brackets broke off, and the wire was making deep cuts into my cheeks. I, too, put in medical requests, and nothing. One night, we were sitting on the bus that took us back to the dorms, and I wedged my water bottle under each bracket and pried them off myself. That's how I got my braces off. Just about everyone at one point would get cradle cap or mold that grew in their hair. Athlete's foot was a rampant issue and caused the bottom of my toes to split open and bleed. It was disgusting, but I think most girls would just eventually stop asking for what they needed because there was really just no point. We were so desperate to get out. We'd do almost anything just to be free. One night, as I was just falling asleep, I could hear a loud crash in the boys' dorm beneath us, and then the siren sounded. My chest still tightens with anxiety thinking about this alarm. All the windows had motion sensors and would set off the most shrill alarm that I can only describe as a World War II siren. The hallways would flash with red lights, and everyone would scamper to the hallway and count off, accounting for everyone. This night was different. Everyone lined up, but you could hear upheaval just beneath our feet. I heard staff screaming, "Get the fuck down! Get down! Backup staff! We need backup staff!" I could feel the vibrations of furniture being shoved and bodies being slammed against the walls. Fear overcame my body. I looked at the dorm parent who I could see also had a look of fear in her eyes. She reported over the radio, "We're all accounted for." The screaming below continued. I could hear smashing and chaos. I stared militantly at the head in front of me, trying to escape in my mind. We stood there for about 25 minutes, and finally we got the directive to go to the other girls' dormitory where we slept in the hallway. This night would be known as the night of the riot. Apparently, several of the boys had organized a plan to escape, and some of them successfully made it off the campus before being scooped up by authorities. But anything to get out of there, right? Later, Jason Finlinson would tell the New York Times that we were able to get rid of some of the bad seeds. But the truth is, none of us were bad kids. We were hurt kids. We were lost kids. We were oppressed in the most extreme ways possible. I stayed at Ivy Ridge for 29 months before I finally graduated. I lost a lot of myself in the process. I lost my autonomy. I lost my sense of self, sense of safety, and the sense that I could control what happened to me. I succumbed to the programming. I fell for it. And that's probably what makes me the angriest now. But I was a child. I was only 14 years old when I was admitted to that school. I learned that I was a bad kid, that I had deserved what happened to me. I learned that I had to be pure, and I wasn't allowed to make mistakes. Before we went home, we were required to write something called a life contract. In this contract, you and your parents would write rules and structure that were very similar to the program. Even after going home, you had levels to achieve and demerits. Every part of my life was pre-planned. What movies I could watch, what music I could listen to, and how I was allowed to dress. I left the facility fully ready to abide by the contract. But when I got home, it was nothing like what I expected. My mom had moved to Western Massachusetts to a little town named Lenox. At the time, my mom was having some very serious mental health issues. She suffered from panic attacks daily. She thought she was having heart attacks and that she was dying. I was so terrified that I was going to have to commit my mom. I so badly just wanted my mom back. So after getting home, I went to enroll at the local school, Lenox Memorial High School. I was told upon enrollment, that they would not accept my credits due to Ivy Ridge portraying that they were accredited when in fact they were not. The new school told me that I was going to have to do the 10th grade all over again. I already felt out of place. I already felt like an alien amongst these other kids. This was a rich school, and the name of the school mascot was the Lennox Millionaires. So you can imagine me coming from a prison-like experience to a school with a bunch of bright-eyed, preppy kids who played lacrosse and wore polo shirts. Plus, I was in a grade with kids younger than me. I felt entirely out of my element. But as usual, I complied. I found it difficult to make friends or to relate to anyone. These kids had gone to school together since they were in preschool, and their parents had prestigious community affiliations. I was an outsider, and it could not have been more glaring. On one of the first days of the school, I accidentally caught myself pivoting around a corner like I was in line structure at the Ridge. Whether anyone saw it or not, it was humiliating. I felt institutionalized. I felt like I didn't know what to do, not constantly being supervised. I was constantly afraid of getting in trouble or like I may be reprimanded. But the rest of the world didn't operate like Ivy Ridge. But after 29 months, it was so deeply ingrained in me. I stayed at this school for about 6 months, but my life at home was only becoming more chaotic. At this point, my mom had developed agoraphobia and perhaps some OCD tendencies with checking doors, checking the stove, checking everything. Her panic attacks were getting worse. And she was also headed towards financial devastation. Before I came home from the program, she and her boyfriend at the time had bought the house that we were living in together. She had completely relied on him for financial support, and just weeks before I was released from Ivy Ridge, he abruptly left, which put her in a position to scramble to come up with $3,000 a month for their mortgage payment, on top of bills and the other costs that it takes just to live. The job market in the area was nil. Either you worked at a restaurant waiting tables or you were a business owner. There was no in between. We were on the verge of losing the house, and the pressure was really starting to take a toll on her. I ended up leaving school with a 10th grade education and got a job at a local creamery. With no other options and impending foreclosure, my mom rented our house out for the summer, and the income for the rent barely met the monstrous mortgage. For 3 months, my mom and I lived out of our 2004 Jeep Grand Cherokee with 3 dogs. On more than one occasion, we would sneak back to the house when the renters weren't there, and we showered in the backyard with the hose. We had a bucket to use the bathroom, or we would go to a local gym to freshen up. I was devastated. This is not what I imagined my home life would be like. I felt bad for my mom. I knew she was crumbling, but once again we found ourselves at odds with each other. I would try to spend as much time as possible out with friends so I didn't have to be in the hot Jeep just waiting for time to pass. I had friends ask me why they never dropped me off at home and why we were always meeting my mom in random parking lots. I didn't know what to say. I was ashamed. She and I were fighting again, and at one point she threatened to send me back to Ivy Ridge. She picked me up from work with all of my things packed and labeled with my initials. I am not fucking going back there. I will run. I don't give a fuck. I am not going back, I told her. Somehow, she ended up not sending me back. Once we finally got into our house, I started planning to move out when I turned 18, which was 8 months away. I had gotten a gift card for my birthday, and I bought things for my new place. I excitedly chattered to my mom about when I move out, I'm going to do this, or when I move out, I'm going to do that. One day she snapped, and she said, "Why don't you just move out then? Pack your shit. You have 1 hour. Get out." My heart broke into a million pieces. Here I was, alone, again. I headed to my room, and packed up all my things in 2 bags. She drove me to my work, threw my bags on the sidewalk, and before I could shut the door on my way out, she sped off. I lugged my bags inside the restaurant and sat at a table in the back, crying, texting friends, asking if I could stay with them. Finally, a friend responded that they had an extra room, and I stayed with her for the next 8 months until I turned 18 and I could finally get an apartment of my own. At this point, you guys, my head was literally spinning. From the last 5 years of my life, I felt like I was drowning, like I was gasping for air. When was I finally going to get a break? I honestly did not know if I could take much more. I had extreme social anxiety. I had manic episodes with rapid cycling deep depression. I would later find out that these were the effects of complex PTSD. About a year later, I would start dabbling with drugs. At night or on the weekends, it was the only thing that I felt relieved me of this mental tug of war and the impending doom that I felt constantly. For a while, it was just something I toyed with, and it really hadn't become a habit yet. But after surviving a domestic assault that nearly killed me and put me in the hospital, my sole mission was to numb. I feel that the control, mental manipulation, and compliance that resulted from my experience at Ivy Ridge made it difficult to identify the warning signs of abuse. For years at the WASP school, I was told to ignore my thoughts. I dissociated and disconnected emotionally to survive. So just a short while later, when I was dating a man who was controlling and violent, I didn't see the red flags because I was so conditioned already to withstand that kind of domination and abuse. I would spend 7 years of my life living in addiction, running from myself, and almost dying several times. I went to an inpatient rehab center and actually left because it had triggered me so much and reminded me of the structure at Ivy Ridge. A few months later, I went back to that same facility and I completed the treatment program and I changed my life. This was 6.5 years ago. And at that point is when my healing journey began. I had a lot to unpack. I had a lot of demons to face and a lot of love that I needed to give myself. It's been 16 years since I first walked into the doors at Ivy Ridge. And even now, sometimes I feel like I'm permanently 14. I have to remind myself that I'm an adult, that I'm safe, and that I have relative control over my environment. It's been a journey. And I feel like I've lived a million lifetimes for just being 30 years old. But more than anything, I'm grateful for all of you. I'm grateful for your bravery, your willingness to heal, and your hunger for justice. Thank you for breathing life into me. And thank you for supporting me each and every day. Truly, thank you. It really means the world to me. And believe it or not, there's actually even more to my story. And maybe someday I will be able to share it all. But this is just the start. So I want to leave you with this thought. Healing is possible. Recovery is possible. Although we cannot undo the past, right? We can't. We can learn to love ourselves in a new way. We can repair our relationships with our family. It has taken a concerted effort for me to dive deep and heal the wounds that were created within my family. But I will tell you now that my mom and I have actually just created a new relationship, right? I realized about myself for a long time that I was wanting to go back to the way that things were when I was a kid, right? I wanted to go back to the old relationship. I wanted to forget that any of this stuff had ever happened. And as we know, that's not necessarily entirely possible. But what I could do was I could show her mercy. I could show her compassion. I could give her forgiveness when I was ready, right? That did not come right away. Okay, I want to tell you that. It's actually very, very recent that I started feeling like I want to love again. I want to love my mom again. And I know that sounds crazy, right? Of course we love our parents. I always loved my mom, even through all of those things. I always did. But what I realized about myself within the past few months is that I wasn't done being parented. When I left the home at 14, that was the end of the parenting that I received. And I wasn't done yet. I wasn't done yet. And as long as I hung on to that resentment and to that anger about not getting the parenting that I felt like I deserved or I felt like I wanted or that I deeply needed, it was driving a wedge in between our relationship now. So I want you to know, though, too, I understand everyone is in different relationships, right? Some parents are not willing to look at it yet. They're not willing to admit fault. They're not willing to apologize. And I understand. I understand where that can be painful, right? Because in order for us to heal, in order for us to move forward, it's important to have that validation and to have that recognition so you can heal inside yourself. But I will tell you, if your parents are not willing to give you that validation that you need, give it to yourself. Your feelings are valid. Your experiences are valid. Everything that you have been through since that point in time is completely valid. Okay? So you don't have to wait on that apology. You give that validation to yourself. So thank you so much for being here with me today, listening to my journey, listening to my story. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please take a moment to leave a review or a rating in iTunes. It helps me tremendously to continue to spread this message. You can share it on social media. If you feel led, you can make a donation to me personally through the Anchor app. I would so love that, and it would completely make my day. Just tap the button that says donate, or please help us continue to fight for WASP survivors and to hold these people accountable, right? You can donate to our GoFundMe page. There is a link in the description of this episode. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. This is Caroline Lorson, and see you next time.